Okay, there we go. Hello and welcome to another episode of our Labs Open Office Hour. We are again joined by Matt Bach. It seems like we were just talking with you the other day, but also I think you were our last. No, Don I think was our last guest for the Open Office Hour. But it seems like you were here just not that long
Yeah.
ago.
Well, now that I'm starting to do more of the the workflow Wednesdays with you on some of those
Mm-hmm.
guys, which those are fun. I really like those ones.
It is. I'm tremendously happy you've been joining it. It helps. I like because you have a better understanding of like how the software really works than I do. I've realized my place as the proxy for the audience. I'm the everyman, the sort of average Joe
Right.
in that sort of a thing. And so it really helps to kind of have that more technical perspective as well and kind of bridge the gap. So I really appreciate it.
Great.
So yeah, today we're back again to talk about Adobe Creative Cloud stuff, DaVinci Resolve, a lot of the more content creative sort of focused workflow and software applications. Which I'm super stoked. Right off the bat, we had some comments and questions from YouTube. John Tibble wanted to know a little bit about Lightroom.
hmm Yeah. I saw he was asking a couple of different questions here. I don't remember. Let's see. His first one was Adobe Lightroom performance. What
Mm-hmm.
things are GPU accelerated in the context of the new Nvidia 30,000? What do they call them? Just the 30 series? The RTX 30
So,
series, I
yeah,
think is what they're
probably.
technically calling them. And for Lightroom. So actually, this is interesting. Normally, we don't even look at GPU performance in Lightroom because it's such a small, insignificant part of it. But they've been doing more and more work on it. So they've been adding it more and more to, I think it's like image processing is where it is. So a lot of the
Okay.
raw stuff, so converting from raw to like visible, an actual image that you can see.
Right.
That I believe is GPU accelerated now. And some of the other stuff, like I'm not sure, they haven't been super straightforward with exactly what is GPU
Hmm.
accelerated, but a lot of like the navigating around images and stuff can be used the GPU.
Oh, nice.
But so we're actually going to be including that in our GPU testing for these new RTX 30 series. So
Mm-hmm.
this is the first time we're really looking at it. And yeah, it's not much. There's not much of a difference in GPUs. And that's honestly, that's not all that unusual. Lightroom is so much heavier on CPU right now than GPU.
Okay.
And that's not just a Lightroom thing. Like Photoshop is the same thing. There's a bunch of effects that are GPU accelerated in Photoshop, but like a low-end GPU will give you almost the same performance as a high-end GPU because
Oh,
it's
that's
just
interesting.
about it's just about having a GPU that can do it because it's so fast at it. GPUs are so fast at these kind of effects that it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
really matter. You're going to become CPU bottlenecked again. Um,
Oh,
yeah, a way I try to explain it to people that aren't like heavy in tech is it's kind of like, okay, you're going to travel to Florida. Let's say I'm going to travel from here, near Seattle to Florida. I'm going to take a
mm-hmm.
plane. So I'm going to drive to the airport, wait in the airport for a while, get on the plane, be on the plane for a long time, and then, at my destination, get in a car again and drive to wherever I'm going. Uh,
Ah,
in this case, it's like the flying in the plane is like the CPU stuff, and the driving in
okay.
the car is the GPU stuff. So like, yeah, sure, I can get to the airport in 10 minutes instead of 20 minutes, but it's still going to take me 12 hours to get to Florida. What's that extra 10 minutes? It doesn't really matter
Ah,
much. So like, but if I
okay.
didn't have a car, then it would take
Sure.
forever because I'd have to walk. So
I see.
in applications like Lightroom, Photoshop, After Effects, even, it's about having a card that's supported, and you really don't need more. Sometimes the thing that's going to determine what card you get isn't the performance of the card, it's how much VRAM you have. So like if you wanted to have multiple 4K displays, you're going to need more
Ah,
VRAM just because of that, not because
sure.
of Lightroom. It's just you need more. So I don't think these 30,000 series are going to be anything special for Lightroom. I mean, we haven't tested it, so like there's
Sure.
always the chance of surprises. There's always like some chance that like Adobe actually built in some new feature that's only enabled on these new cards or something. So we'll have to see,
Right.
but I doubt it. I doubt it.
Ah. I see. So he went on to ask, would I be getting more Lightroom performance from investing 1,000 into my editing machine CPU or GPU?
Yep,
Sounds like the
100%
CPU would be
CPU.
the way to. Okay.
Yeah, and
Okay.
that definitely check out our articles. So if you go to pugetsystems.com, you go to articles, and then when you're on the hardware articles, in fact, here, I can just, how do I switch to my screen? OBS camera. There we go.
Oh,
So if
there we
we're
go.
going to our site, you
Mm-hmm.
just go to publications, articles, and we've got a lot of placeholders getting ready for the new GPUs that, don't worry, there's nothing in there at all because we don't have it. But then if you would go to like Lightroom here, you can do Lightroom, and then you could even get it down to like processors. And then you can look at some of our recent testing where, so here's all of these processors, and you can look at, okay, well, which one is it worth it for me to get? So a lot of people will end up kind of in the middle here because that's where you're getting the most bang for your buck. A lot of people don't really go up to like these Threadripper CPUs. I mean, but if you got $1,000 budget, you might. But it's just,
Yeah.
I mean, it is a big jump, but most of that performance, actually, if you really dig into this, I don't want to be locked into talking about just this the whole time. But if you dig into it, a lot of that is mostly in like exporting performance. And so if you're not exporting tens of thousands of images at the same time, or at once, do you really care that exporting is going to take you 2 minutes rather than a minute? Maybe not. In which case, you take that money and you spend it on like upgrading your monitor or something else that's going to actually really improve the quality of your work. Because it's not always like computers doing the stuff, but a lot of times you got to make sure that your peripherals are up to snuff too, or your room. Like this room I just moved and it's powder blue and there's not a closet door and stuff, so I'm going to be investing in this room to make it not so echoey and more pleasant to work in.
Sure. We do have another question from Twitch. Tachulu asks, speaking of VRAM, I'm just now getting into TensorFlow. I have a 4 gigabyte VRAM Nvidia card. Am I going to need an upgrade?
Oh man, TensorFlow isn't as much my wheelhouse. That's more of Don. When is he scheduled to come back on? Because last week was John.
I think next week.
Is it next week?
Yeah, I think next week.
So definitely come back on next week and ask Don that, because that will... Don will probably go on about that for quite a while, depending on exactly what you're doing. Because it's a great topic. It's a great question. It is. My guess is what he'll say is that 4 gigs is starting to get pretty low. You'll probably want at least an 8 gig card. I know he's really excited, or he's always excited about like the Titan cards because they have 24 gigs of VRAM. And but I believe it just comes down to what you're doing though.
Yeah, it's gonna. I think from what I remember of some of the things that he's shown on our open office hours in the past is it's how big the job is. Like how, so kind of like what you were saying is like what exactly you're doing, because it has to move, it has to actually hold basically the whole job in memory while it crunches the numbers on it. So having more VRAM is always better. Otherwise you can run into weird issues and stuff like, I'm not sure exactly what the errors are, but I know it doesn't like having not enough.
Yeah. It's just like storage, like your hard drive. Like if you have a hard drive that's way bigger than you need, it doesn't really make it faster. But if you run out of storage space, well, that's a big problem. You've got to like delete stuff, or you've got to like have smaller files, like lower the resolution of all your photos that you have stored or something. And so it's going to be kind of the same thing.
Isn't Adobe Max is coming up soon, isn't
October.
it?
Yeah. It's free this year too.
All virtual.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, it's kind of weird because normally all of the sessions they put up for people to watch afterwards. Like only the difference is this time, like, well, you get into like, I think they're having some drawings for like prizes if you register. So, hey, you might as well register. Maybe you'll get prizes. And you can watch it like live. But definitely, if there's anyone here who is like, in the content creation, or even actually Don, we were just talking about the scientific stuff. He's actually registered because at Adobe Max, there's always a lot of stuff on AI and machine learning. There's only like 3 or 4 sessions so far, but usually there's a good dozen or dozen and a half sessions. And I usually try to go to all of them because they're super interesting.
Right.
But
anything particular standing out to you so far that you are interested in?
At Adobe Max this year?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's still a bit early. It seems like the first round of sessions, then they add more and add more and add more. I'm trying to remember
Right.
what I signed up for. I signed up for a lot of stuff because I usually just try to fill my schedule with anything
Right.
that's interesting. Um, but this is actually getting pretty odd for me, or not odd, but interesting for me because this is going to be my fourth Adobe Max, I think, maybe third.
Okay.
And each year I go and I try to like go to as many sessions as I can to learn. And at this point,
Right.
I feel like I've got the foundation knowledge, like maybe not the skills. You don't want me actually like
Right.
creating a video for you, but I have the
Sure.
foundation like knowledge for a lot of these things. So most of the sessions, like I don't need to go to an intro to Photoshop session anymore.
Sure.
Um, but so yeah, like these machine learning ones are going to be super interesting. There's
Mhm.
a lot about um, collaboration and remote working that I'm interested in. That's not
Okay.
really going to be for like the actual work I do, but because we're all working remote right now, like I'm really interested to see like just like what other people are doing, especially on these kind of things where you
Yeah.
have like 5 editors working on a project. How do they handle it? So that's going to be interesting to me, I think.
Yeah, I think it will be because that's stuff we've touched on with other experts and stuff in the past too, is like how things are shifting to a more remote workflow.
Mhm.
um oh Michael Camus was talking about a particular tool,
Bebop.
and
Yeah, it's
that's it. Yeah.
it's like remote desktop, but you're remoting into their I mean, they're servers, but it's just remoting in, and then you can load up Premiere or whatever.
Right, right, and that sounded pretty cool. Like I think that officially launched here pretty recently in the last
Yeah,
month or so.
might be. And
Um,
there's a bunch of others. Amazon has their what do they call it? Amazon Remote Workstation or something. It's a
okay,
very similar thing. The problem with all of those is that performance is terrible because they're running on server hardware, and it's
right,
not made for any of this kind of stuff. So the only
yeah,
way to do it like well would be to have a whole bunch of individual workstations. But
ooh,
having a whole bunch of workstations that you're renting out, it's just not cost effective. Like you can't build
yeah,
up a $10,000 workstation and then rent it out for $1 an hour or whatever it is. So
right.
yeah, last Adobe Max actually, I went to one. It's basically a promo by Amazon for their remote workstation stuff, and like they're all talking about how it's all great and awesome. And then like near the very end, there was one little slide that's like, well, what can you actually edit? And it's like, well, you're not going to do HD. It's like,
Yeah,
oh, so you can't even
which
edit HD? Like you can't do 1080p? Like, no, you've got to like down your proxies and work off of proxies that are like 480p or 480 or whatever it is.
wow, that's
Oh, well, you just lost
I feel
everybody in the audience.
I feel like it's one of those like kind of first step sort of things.
Hmm.
It's like we're now at a point where we can do this, but yes, the quality is probably not that great. The overall experience is probably going to be kind of, but at least we're there and we can start improving,
Yeah, I
right?
think there's a multiple things that I think are going to be a bottleneck. One, well, the thing that people always ask about is actually latency. Like, does it feel bad? And actually, my understanding is
Right.
it's pretty good. So
Ooh,
latency, I don't think is as big of a problem as people think. But the biggest
that's good.
problems are where is your data? Like, if you want to edit your
Oh,
4K media on this, server on Amazon or Bebop, you've got to upload all of your files to there.
oh, geez.
And so either you're going through and then you're only uploading the selects, which means you have to have a powerful enough local workstation to work with them anyway, or you upload all of your stuff, which now you're talking about like 500 or a terabyte, 2 terabytes of data you've got to upload over the crappy internet in the US. And
Right.
like it just takes forever. Or you can mail some of these ones, you can mail a hard drive to them and then they'll load it locally. But then you've got to mail
Huh.
a hard drive. Like that's not going to be fast either.
Which, and well, I mean, it could be, but then
Yeah.
there's a danger there if you're working on something that shouldn't be
Hmm.
lost,
Yeah.
like that horrible story about almost losing Toy Story 2 because
Yeah.
but I mean, a different situation, but like something like that is not unreasonable.
No, well,
So,
and a lot of these places, like the footage cannot get out of their hands. Again,
right.
this is a kind of an extreme example, but I forget where it was. Maybe it was a Black Magic event. They were talking about Star Wars, one of the Star Wars movies, and how all of their like they would shoot, and then all of their film would go into an armored truck and go in an armed convoy down to wherever it is that they were storing and working on their stuff. So it was like people with semi-automatic rifles and stuff, because that's how seriously they take, like, because that is just like that actual footage is like everything. If they lose any of that or it's taken, how many millions and millions of dollars is lost each day of filming? Like, that's the most expensive thing, is that film.
Wow, that's huge. So we do have another question from YouTube. Artac is asking 10980XE or the 10900K for After Effects.
It's gonna be 10900K. But let me again.
Let's go to the results. Let's go to the benchmarks.
Yeah, I always gotta do that. I never trust myself to remember absolutely everything.
Hey man, when you're juggling 10, 12 different software platforms with all kind of different testing, and it's all a little different, I don't blame you. I always look it up too when I see these sorts of questions.
All right, so this was some of the recent stuff we did. There's some weird CPUs in here. I think these have, oh no, this doesn't include the XTs, the AMD XT or the 10980. No, yes, 10980K. No, 10850.
Okay.
10850. Yeah, all these numbers. But because those ones are basically the exact same as the other ones. But it's basically 10900K, as you can see up here, is pretty near the top, but the 10700K is like right behind it. And same thing with like a lot of the Ryzens. Like, you get this really big clump here at the top where like there's not going to be much of a difference between like an i7, i9, or a Ryzen 7 and a Ryzen 9. Like, it's really not a big difference. The 10980 XE, I can make that even bigger. The 10980 XE is also right kind of in that pack. So like, I don't think there's any point in getting a 10980 XE over a 10900K. It's technically a few percent slower, and it's a lot more expensive. If you did want more performance, you would go up. Really, the 3960X Threadripper is the only one that makes sense, because the 32 core, the 3970X, is actually slightly slower, and the 64 core is actually way slower. And that's just because of After Effects isn't all that well threaded. So more cores oftentimes will make it worse. Not always. It depends on the CPUs and how they work. It's just like the XCs. Let me switch back. The 10 series, the X series. Like, you basically don't see much of a difference because they have such good single threaded performance that they're all basically the same. And yeah, that's just for After Effects. Now, the couple of caveats I'll put onto this is, one, Adobe has been teasing adding better multi-threading into After Effects for a while. There was a couple of sessions at Adobe Max last year that they talked about it as a part of a larger session. So they've been talking about that for a while. I don't think there's been anything official from Adobe about when that's going to come into play, or even how well it's going to work. We have no idea. But if that does come soon and it does work really well, then it might be worth like a 10980 XE to get those extra 8 cores. But even then, my guess is that it's not going to be that much better than like a 3950X Ryzen. So then it just comes down to, do you go with the Ryzens, which are slightly cheaper, but then you don't have great Thunderbolt support, or do you go with Intels that have Thunderbolt and you might pay a little bit more for it? Or you just go Threadripper. Again, you don't get the Thunderbolt, but you can go like that. No, I actually do see it, because I have chat open too, that someone on YouTube was asking about like multitasking and stuff. And yeah, this is just for that one application. And we tend to do our testing that way. We focus on one application and look at it. We rarely do cross, just because like everybody's workflow is different. Someone might spend 90% of the time in Premiere Pro and use After Effects a little bit, so they don't really care about it all that much, or it might be 50-50. But even if they spend their time 50-50, there's probably one that they are concerned more about. Like, maybe they're already planning on using proxies in Premiere Pro, so it doesn't really matter. But After Effects, they hate how slow After Effects is, so they want to prioritize, because what CPU is good in one app is totally different than for another. And partially that is kind of why our consultants are still like absolutely vital. It's because even if you go through all of our benchmarks and you read it all, like, being able to put it together of, okay, well, here's the 4 applications I use. How does that, mixing and matching it is so hard to do. But So yeah,
Heck,
that really is a case by case basis.
excuse me. I've had to. I answered a question on social media once about a bit of a crossover like that,
Mhm.
and it's hard to make a decision when all the information you have is like, I just run these two programs. What
Yeah,
do I
that's not
choose?
enough.
And it's like the best you can do at that point is just, okay, where's a bit of a crossover, like,
Mhm.
okay, this CPU is in the top 5 for both, so that might be the right choice. But really, man,
Yeah.
it's
Well,
hard. It's
and it's hard too because you get outside of that. Like some people browse Chrome and have a billion tabs open, and that's going to eat up like all of their system memory. Okay, well they need even
right.
more. But I mean, most stuff, like if it's not really hitting your CPU or GPU much, like if it's just Chrome open, or if you got like some music player running or something like that, generally that doesn't change things all that much.
Yeah.
Like having a whole bunch of extra cores, like it doesn't usually make all that big of an impact. I mean, just like when you're working on something, just bring up Task Manager and look at the load. It's probably going to be like, oh, it's using my CPU 5% as I'm just sitting here idle. Like even right
That's
now,
an
I've got a bunch of
interesting.
stuff open. I've got YouTube open and all this other stuff. I'm on Zoom,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I have a 10900K and it's using 4%. And like 7% of my
Wow.
GPU because it's probably because I have OBS running too, and that's probably doing some GPU stuff. So like, yeah, that's
That's
not
fun.
a big deal, probably. But,
That's funny. I open my own performance here too. So I'm on a laptop, 6700K with the 980M, and I have OBS. So I'm hosting both the Zoom and the stream, right? 1080p, 30 FPS at 2500 bitrate. I have at least a dozen Chrome tabs open, Slack, OBS, Spotify, the chat, everything else. I'm right around 40% CPU and about 50% GPU.
okay, so yeah, if you're doing
And
all that and then you want to run like After Effects or something, yeah, okay, maybe you want a little bit more cores.
let me open
But
Premiere real quick, and we'll see how things go.
how many frames you start dropping on the stream?
Right.
Yeah.
I'm shocked I have 32 gigs of RAM in this laptop. That was pretty cool.
Huh.
um. So, quick question from Mateo Parente on YouTube. CUDA implementation on the playback engine. How does it work exactly in the pipeline?
Ooh. Well, for people who aren't familiar with all these terms and phrases and stuff,
Yeah.
he's referring to in the Adobe, what do you call it? Mercury playback engine is what it's called. It's what Premiere Pro, Media Encoder, After Effects use to leverage the GPU. So you can have it in multiple modes. You can have it in CUDA mode if you're doing Nvidia video cards, OpenCL for AMD. If you're on Max, it'd be using Metal, or you can use software mode, which just uses the CPU instead of the GPU. How does it work in the pipeline? Oh, because I mean, usually when people ask me about pipeline, I might need a little bit of clarification from you. They're talking about like, okay, so you're playing back a piece of footage, like that's being done usually on like the CPU, and then effects are applied, and then like you're viewing it. Oh man, I'm not quite sure exactly where in the pipeline it is. If I had to guess, it'd be pretty late. I would guess it'd probably try to do all the CPU based stuff first, and then it would do the Mercury engine stuff. But man, that's probably a question for Adobe. They've been doing more live streams actually. What
Mm-hmm.
was Jason Levine, I think, was hosting a couple. So you might look up his YouTube channel and see if he's got any live streams scheduled, because he did one a couple of weeks ago with the After Effects devs, I believe, and they would be able to answer that question for you. So look up Jason Levine, and honestly, you could probably just like tweet at him. I think he's super active on social media. So he might be able to give you an answer, or just go into like the probably the Premiere Pro forums are probably the most active for that kind of a question. But
Yeah.
man, cool. And that's going to be even further complicated now because in the Premiere Pro beta, they're adding GPU accelerated decoding for H.264 and H.265, which is huge.
Ooh.
That's going to be super cool. So I guess this is going to be my own little thing in here. I'm going to stop looking at questions for a minute because I want to talk about it because it's so exciting.
Sure,
it's
go
so
for
amazing. So in the last version of Premiere Pro, hopefully you don't hear that. The last version of Premiere Pro, they added GPU accelerated encoding of H.264 and H.265. So when you're actually exporting to like a YouTube preset kind of a thing, it can use the GPU now, and performance is amazing. Like it's so good. Before you could only do that with Intel QuickSync, so you'd have to have a CPU that supported it, and like it was okay faster. But now with the GPU, like it's insanely faster. I think we saw anywhere from 2 to 5 times faster, something like that.
Oh yeah, I remember. It was a remarkable improvement.
Yeah,
Huge.
it's amazing.
Even on the lower end cards, it was like.
Yeah, and it's like people on laptops, like you, like in your case, like because laptop CPUs aren't all like powerful, but just having a decent any GPU is going to give you a huge bump. Now, I mean, there's a couple of things with it though. Quality isn't as good because it's a lot of this kind of technology came about because of streaming, actually. So, like, I think Zoom and OBS uses, NVENC is what's called Nvidia Encoding, and like that's kind of where it started because you don't need quite as good of quality for streaming. You just need to make sure that you keep your frames up, because that's way more important than a little bit of artifacting kind of a stuff. So that's kind of where it came about. And so there's some things you can't do. You can't do 2-pass encoding with it. So like, well, man, I don't need to get into encoding schemes here. But so frankly to say, the quality is slightly lower. We did a bunch of testing and like, yeah, if you're looking at like a 4K export and you're like zooming way in and you're looking at 2 different things, like I think we noticed the biggest difference on textures like pavement. So like if you've got a shot of a street with some cars, you might notice it in the pavement is a little bit more uniform. There's less detail when you're using GPU accelerated encoding than the software, but like it's not a big deal. But now in the beta, the current beta, you can download that and you can try it out. They're adding decoding support for GPUs, and so that should be amazing. And that's really huge because there are so many people now just shooting on their phones. Like they're just using their phone to shoot. Yeah. And like, that's great. The quality is pretty decent, but those are usually going to be recording in H.264 or HEVC, and it's going to be variable frame rate, which like any editing software is just going to crap out, when you have variable frame rate. But now that we got GPU accelerated decoding, I'm hoping that's going to make it a lot easier for people. So people shooting on phones, drones too. Drones are usually a big one because they highly compress those files because you don't want to send up, a drone and then run out of memory when it's way out somewhere.
Right.
But yeah, so that's going to be super exciting. I want to look at that. Right now, we're kind of in like prep for the 30 series launch mode right now. We're testing all of the other cards, getting all that out of the way. And trying to get everything ready for that. But after that, I hopefully want to do a little bit of stuff because I think it's going to be, I don't know, it's either going to be absolutely amazing or we're going to find out that like, oh no, QuickSync like it did it about as good as it could be. So yeah, like just as long as you have a CPU with QuickSync. But my guess, based on the encoding performance, I think it's going to be a pretty big deal.
Yeah, that sounds good. Jeez.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. Obviously, I can rant about it.
That's pretty cool. There's some talk in YouTube about Apple's new Thunderbolt 3 Pro cable.
I don't know anything about it.
Huh.
Let's Google it. Apple Thunderbolt.
Redith Graham mentions that it's a high-quality construction DisplayPort Thunderbolt 3 USB 3.1 100-watt charging. I don't know if any other cable does that. Does everything in one. It's very useful to have around.
I mean,
interesting.
The cable's a cable, right? As long as there's a high-quality cable. Like I don't know what they could be doing on a cable. Like they could be using a larger gauge wire, I suppose.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. It's probably
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't really know all that much about all that kind of stuff. I do know that Apple cables are usually pretty high quality. I know a lot of people give them flack about like the cables on like the laptop chargers, like how they fray and stuff.
Yeah.
But usually Apple stuff is pretty good quality, and something like a cable, it doesn't matter if it's going to a PC or a Mac, whatever. As long as there's nothing active, if it's all just passive, it's a cable. But Yeah, the thing with Apple that I always tell people is like it's a known quality. Like that's
Oh
the hard
yeah.
thing, even with like PCs. Like PCs, you have people like us where like our quality is amazing, and then you've got some others. We don't need to name names, but some others where like they don't
Not so
like,
much.
yeah, like if it's not a name brand part, like yes, it'll be an Nvidia something video card, but what's the power supply? Oh, it's this cheap
Right.
like $15 power supply. Oh. And cables kind of do the same thing too. Like there's some really cheapo cables out there that are terrible. There's also some very affordable cables out there that are great. Like
Oh yeah.
some of the, even like the monoprice stuff, some of their stuff
Hmm.
is so hit and miss. Some of it is great, some of it's terrible.
Right.
Same thing with like Amazon, the Amazon basic stuff. A lot of that stuff is pretty good. I don't know
It
if
works.
it's probably not going to be up to the same quality as this, but
Right.
uh,
Huh. Matteo Parenti on YouTube asks, never tried, but does H265 kind of solve the issues of NVENC encoder?
So I don't know. So H265, you basically get the same quality at half the bit rate of H264.
Hmm.
And I mean, you can kind of extrapolate that out and say that at the same bit rate, it'll be the same quality. But it always gets kind of funky because as you go up in bit rate, the quality doesn't increase linearly. Like there's only so much you can do.
Okay.
It could solve some of those issues. The problem is it's a lot harder to process. So
Mm.
if you're looking to decrease your export times, yeah, you could switch to H265, but that's going to increase your render times again. And at different bit rates, is the quality difference enough? I think it's one of the hardest things is like what bit rate do you use and what codec do you export to? Do you do H64 or H265? And man, that's such a hard question. And I think the answer is different for everyone. It's just
Yeah.
like hardware encoding versus software encoding that we were talking about before, like the quality difference. Some people are super adamant that like, no, the quality difference is huge and you should never use it. No one should ever do it, ever. And then you have other people like, I can't see the difference. It's great. Like it's just
Yeah.
faster and it's no different. And like that's not true either. Like it is a little bit different. I think most people, it doesn't really matter enough. They're just going to use whatever is fastest. But I do
Right.
think it's also your delivery medium or what you're delivering to makes a big difference. If it's going on YouTube, they're going to compress the hell out of it anyway. So like it just
Right.
needs to be close to, you know, as good as possible. Like, I mean, heck, you can upload ProRes, I think, to YouTube. Like, I don't know
Wow.
why you would do that, but you can.
Man.
You can upload ProRes. It'll take forever because it's huge.
I was gonna say it must take like a day to process on their end. Like that'd
Yeah,
be crazy.
because they're just going to take
Wow.
it and then they're going to re-encode it, you know, with
Hmm.
whatever encoding scheme they use, and it's going to be tiny again. um,
Wow.
so, but I mean, if you're talking about having like a master that you're going to store that you don't want it to be too big, so you don't want like a ProRes master, but you don't want it to be, you know, H264. You want to be a little bit higher quality without sacrificing too much drive space. I think H265 is awesome.
Okay.
But to me, that's kind of its place, is like master storage, where, you know, so file size is still important because you're storing it long term, where you're putting it on the cloud for storage. And you can take that hit for exporting performance. Otherwise, like I think just H264 is just, it's still just the industry standard. I mean, they're already talking about H266, I think, or something like that. And
Really?
yeah, I think it's already like starting to become like defined, and it's like, I don't know.
Wow.
We'll see.
Huh. There was mention. What is this? Mr. D. Wilkster. I'm going to say that's probably how that's broken out. He says he works at an animation studio and they use software encoding because quality is more important than speed.
Mhm.
File sizes are usually smaller for the same quality with good software encoding, like Handbrake, for example. Media encoder isn't nearly as good. I wonder why that would be.
Well, you have different encoding algorithms in different
Huh.
software. But yeah, I mean, and that's the thing too. Yeah, like he's mentioning Handbrake. Like, yeah, you can use Handbrake. I know some people like to use Resolve, DaVinci Resolve for some of that stuff sometimes.
Interesting.
But yeah, we were talking about quality before. The other thing you can do with software encoding instead of hardware is you can do two pass. So it'll go through, it'll encode the whole video, and then it'll go back and it'll look at it and be like, oh, we can give up a little bit of quality here and put it here because like here is just like, this is my wall. Like I don't need super high quality here, but on this side I've got these like snowflake patterns that are hopefully going to be gone the next time I'm on a stream. So like we want a little bit more quality here because there's actually some patterns and stuff. And so that's kind of the basics of what you can do with like 2-pass. And that's only available on software. I don't quite know why it's not available on hardware encoding. It must just not be something that's built into it. So that's another reason why software can be even more higher quality than what you might notice, at least at first, if you were just to do a quick export and you just the only thing you changed is hardware to software. And that was the only thing you changed because there's more settings with software.
Okay. You mentioned different algorithms. If it's encoding the same, if it's all H.264, why would there be different ways of?
You're getting outside of my area of expertise.
Okay, because if it's a standard, you would think everybody would do it the same way, or is it more the result that's the standard?
Yeah, it's the end result of like each frame because because H.264 especially because how it works is, oh man, I need like whatever. So H.264, how it works is you have your first frame is called a keyframe or an iframe. I think it's called an iframe. And so that is a full picture. Like if you just pulled that one frame, it would be just a picture, like you would expect from a frame. But then the next frame, I can't remember what they are. It's like B or H frames or something like that. Those are just what's different from the first frame. So like if I'm sitting here and I just move my hand, if that's the only movement, the first frame would show everything. The second frame would just show my hand, and that's it as it's moving across. And it keeps going. And you have multiple different kinds. Like you have ones that are based on the last iframe. You have some that can be based off of the last iframe or the next iframe. So it looks forward and back. And then you have ones that only look forward actually to the next iframe. That's why it's really complicated for like editing software to do. Like, my phone can play back H.264 no problem because it's only having to go in one order. It's just doing it in sequence. Versus editing software, it actually has to like every frame, it has to figure out like where it is and all of this stuff and actually generate that entire frame. It can't just show what's changed because like if you're going to apply effects or something, it has to know the whole frame. So there's different ways that they could do that because there's like spacing of how often those iframes can change. And I don't think it's very widely talked about. Like no one knows like how far apart those iframes are.
Weird.
And so like they can change, they could determine different ways of that, just different like encoding schemes, like, different ways of compressing this stuff and then actually, storing the bits. It's just like how you have, PNG or JPEG and all that kind of different stuff. Like the end result is going to look the same when you go to a website. But it's different ways of doing it and storing that data. I'm sure there's some of that kind of stuff for the like actual encoding schemes. And that's why you have some that are like faster, like hardware encoding, it's faster, but it's a little bit lower quality. Then you have like software, and then you have all the different variations of all that stuff. Like even on hardware, you've got Nvidia, NVENC, and AMD. I don't remember what it is. AMD something. That's their hardware encoding scheme, and like they're slightly different. And we actually looked at the quality difference, and it's slightly different between even Nvidia and AMD, even though it's all H.264. It all ended up being the same bit rate, but it's just slightly different.
That's crazy. And then too, there's the difference between hardware encoding and software encoding, like. It's all done on hardware.
It's all done on hardware. It's terrible terminology. It's just software encoding is just using the CPU. Basically, that's basically the crux of it. Is software is done on the CPU, hardware is done on the GPU or some other form of specialized hardware, like Intel QuickSync is hardware encoding.
Yeah, or using tensor cores or something in particular, something specific. No, as an example.
It could be if like you started using that. I don't think anything uses that. And this whole like software versus hardware encoding is really only applies to like the video world. Like once you get outside of video, it means nothing.
Yeah, because it just that always tripped me up in the past. It's like, well, wait, is there something different about how the GPU is crunching the numbers than how the software is doing it?
And it is. But
Ooh, I don't know if we can answer this one. Mateo's asking about the new graphics cards. He's saying, have you seen the video cards with a Z leaked 3080 performance benches? What do you think of the first results? Also, what do you think about the fact that next gen didn't change the NVENC chip? So I guess that last part we could talk about.
Yeah,
Maybe.
leaks and stuff, we always have to be super careful and never comment on because we are an NDA partner with Nvidia and AMD and Intel and all those guys. So sometimes we do have access to information that isn't public. So we always have to be super careful because we don't want to be the leakers ever.
Right. And
yeah,
in my opinion, it's always best to wait until after the official embargoes lift, because pictures, any sort of performance benchmarks, any of that stuff that may have leaked could be faked, could be,
Yeah, so
whatever.
I have not seen that leak, or I think I saw that it was there, but I never look at those because I never trust any of those things because, I mean, we've experienced it enough for ourselves where like there aren't drivers pre-launch often.
Right.
So like what are they running this things on? Who knows? And I'm not saying that's the case this time, but that's very common. Like we have to deal with that with like CPU launches where like, oh, we didn't get a BIOS that works with these CPUs until like the day before launch. Great.
That's the truth. That's the truth right there. That has actually happened.
Don't worry about putting us in a bad position. I saw the thing, but it's always a fun thing to talk about. And but based on the official specs, I mean, there's some really cool things. Like I think like the CUDA cores have increased like by 2 times on most of the cards. The pricing.
I think that's been.
The pricing for the 3070, I think, is pretty close to the 2070 Super pricing, but the 3080, if you're looking at it compared to like a 2080 Ti, like it's like $500 cheaper, and the 3090 compared to a Titan is like $1,000 cheaper and more CUDA cores.
Right, the whole pricing structure is outstanding. I think everybody's going to be very happy.
And I'm not sure why they're doing it. Like they have such a monopoly on the high end market, like AMD is a competitor at like the low end and up to about the mid range, around like a 2060 kind of stuff. But they really don't have anything that competes, above that outside of like gaming. Like AMD focuses heavily on gaming, and so things like Premiere Pro or DaVinci Resolve, like it's just they don't really compete against Nvidia at the top end.
Yeah. So, Chulu on Twitch kind of makes a good point there. Maybe Nvidia knows that Big Navi is going to make a bit of a splash.
Who knows? Maybe. I mean, that I think AMD just had an announcement the other day about it, and it was like September. I didn't actually watch their like announcement because it was one of their like, we're announcing the announcement kind of a thing. So it's like, I'm not really all that.
Yeah,
I don't really care about announcements of announcements. Like,
right. It's coming.
But just like you said, Houston, too, like you never rely on anything pre-launch. Like, don't believe Nvidia's charts. Don't believe Intel's charts. Don't believe leaks because they're all. I mean, anything that's from a manufacturer like Intel, Nvidia, AMD. Those are going to be super cherry pick results no matter what.
Yeah.
And that's just the nature of it. Like they're not going to show off on like this big stage during a big announcement. Like we're 2% faster. Like, no,
right.
They're not going to do that.
Yeah.
Like that wouldn't make any sense. So they're going to show the things that are exciting. And like all these like leaks and stuff, again, like you've got pre-launch drivers, you've got, firmwares, you've got, and a lot of these people that leak stuff, like I've looked through some of it, and I don't trust their testing methodology. To be frank, so
bad
I
science.
Believe any of it. Some of it's just like, oh, why would you do that? And that's not even just those leakers. I'm always super surprised. There was, I'm not going to name names, but there was one product launch fairly recently where. I looked at their big old like PDF specs, like their whole launch stuff, and I'm looking through like their charts, like, oh, they play this much faster in this test, and it was a GPU launch, so I guess that only limits it to Nvidia and AMD, but soon maybe Intel. And there's one test in there, and like that doesn't use the GPU at all. Like that's CPU.
I know what you're talking about. I know exactly the one you're talking about.
But like it's a CPU test, and they're putting it in their GPU launch stuff. It's like. that doesn't make any sense at all. I think someone in like marketing ran these benchmarks or something
And
didn't actually understand them at all.
and that's the thing. As a marketing person myself, I'm telling you right now, the things that I see from the big guys like that, you cannot take them even at their own word, especially on their big announcement days. Their graphs aren't labeled well. They won't label the axes. They won't define what these performance gains are. They'll add weird data that doesn't make sense, or they'll cherry pick this one test out of 100 was super good for some reason. Yeah, it's just wait.
Yeah. Even this
Always.
Nvidia launch, I think there was one chart where they were comparing like these new cards to a 1080, but it was running like some RT, like ray tracing something. So it's like, yeah, of course it's way better on the new cards because that actually has RT cores. The 1080 Ti doesn't have RT cores. It's like,
right.
Yeah. And I mean, even that, like that's semi-valid because like, okay, yeah, if you have a game or whatever that's doing ray tracing and can use the RT cores, then yeah, it's going to be way faster on a card that has those cores. But they don't, like you said, they don't always label that stuff well and all that kind of jazz.
Yeah, that's what gets me the most. I love data. Okay, big fan of data and like extrapolating like results and things. When you don't label your axes properly, it drives me nuts.
Or you don't have them zeroed.
Yeah. Oh.
The performance goes from 100 to 110. That's huge. Like, no, that's 10%. It's not 5 times faster.
But I digress. There is interesting mention of Intel getting into the GPU game.
That's exciting.
That is kind of cool. I know. This past year, I think Intel's bought up a few big name engineers from both Nvidia and AMD. I know it was years ago. The Phi cards ended up being like what their first try at GPUs. They were like, "Ooh, that didn't work out." So we're going to take let's
jam a whole bunch of low-powered CPU cores onto a card and call it something. That wasn't really GPU.
This time around, they definitely seem to be making like a serious go at it. Do you have any comment in that? I haven't looked real deep. I wonder if you have.
Yeah, again, we got to be careful because we do know some stuff. But I believe. Well, I don't know. I'm going to talk generalities then, just to be safe in case there's any.
Sure. Yeah, I didn't realize we may have.
Yeah, well, again, it's hard. I don't think I know anything that is not public info, but again, I'm going to be careful. But generalities here. Best case, Intel comes out and they have some video card that like competes with the high-end AMD and Nvidia market. I don't think that's realistic because like going from 0 to 100 like that is pretty nuts. I think it's going to be more likely that we see fairly low power stuff. I think like something that'd be great for laptops. Kind of a situation.
That'd be interesting.
Because especially because they can marry it with their CPUs. It can be an all Intel kind of platform, and it's all better interconnected. And they kind of already have that. They have their Iris graphics or whatever that's built into the CPUs, and it can just be an extension of that. But even if it is terrible performance, let's say it's equivalent to like a 1660 video card from Nvidia. So it's a fairly low medium range card. If nothing else, it just brings someone else new into the game. And I mean, it's going to be OpenCL. I think we already know. I think it's just going to be OpenCL. Like they're not making some weird like thing like CUDA. So it's going to be like AMD where they're using the open frameworks. At least I believe so. But that's going to be good because honestly, NVIDIA is so good with CUDA because their documentation is amazing. Like any developer I talk to, like Adobe or Blackmagic, any of those guys, and you get into like OpenCL versus CUDA or even like Metal, it's like CUDA. We love CUDA because like it's well documented and it just works. That's because NVIDIA has dumped so much resources into developing CUDA. And then you have like OpenCL where like it's an open standard and like AMD uses it, but like the documentation from my understanding isn't as great. It doesn't just work as much as like CUDA. So that's why you tend to see a lot of stuff that's based on CUDA, like a lot of ray tracing rendering and stuff like Octane is just CUDA, because it's so much easier for them to do.
I see.
But if Intel's coming in, and if they're going to be using OpenCL, again, even if the performance is crap at first, they're going to be starting to do a lot of that stuff. And Intel is so huge, and they can spend so much resources on stuff that hopefully that'll develop OpenCL like way better. So more people will start implementing it, or implementing like new features in OpenCL. That'll bring up Intel, that'll bring up AMD, and that'll kind of get them hopefully to like match Nvidia for the top end. And we might come into the point where we have 3 options for not just low end or medium, but even high end stuff.
Ooh, that'd be cool.
That'll be so good, because competition is good for everybody except for the people competing. And honestly, Intel, Nvidia, and AMD, like whatever, I care about the consumers. I care about myself.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's going to be awesome, because even we've seen what's happened between Intel and AMD recently with CPUs. Like, CPU performance has jumped massively since AMD really started like the Ryzen stuff. And I want to see that with video cards. Like, video cards are still having pretty big jumps.
Oh, sure.
And I feel like the hardware is going okay, but it's like the software side of things that's still like lagging behind. Like, gaming obviously is its own thing, but like especially on the professional, like Adobe is just now adding GPU accelerated encoding and decoding to Premiere Pro and Media Encoder. Like, that's not a new thing, but they're finally adding it, and we'll start to see more and more of that kind of stuff. So that's what Intel getting into GPUs makes me excited about, is more the software side than anything.
I had a question. This is something that I personally don't understand, and I hope maybe you can shed some light on this. AMD has an APU, which I understand has essentially like an onboard graphics driver.
Yeah.
Or is it any different than the Intel like case, right? The case that have an integrated graphics part.
My understanding is like the Intel ones is a fairly low graphics processing, and oh man, this is getting probably into like really heavy details, but my understanding is that it's fairly low power, versus the AMD APUs. It's actually, they take a GPU die and jam it onto this next to the CPU on the same like chip. That's my understanding. And so it can do some cool things like it can pool memory and things like that, which I guess the Intel graphics can too. It's just, some of it's just marketing. They call it an APU and they make a big deal about it, when really it's not all that different than the Iris graphics on Intel chips. It's just more powerful.
Now that leads me to another thing. With Intel entering the GPU game, would that mean that we could see a more robust integrated graphics processing on like future 20,000 series CPU?
And I think that's where we're going to see it, like in laptops and stuff, especially. I don't even know. I wouldn't be surprised if the first like Intel like full on graphics are not only laptop, and it just comes like packaged with their CPU. That could be possible. Maybe it'll be a discrete thing. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if the first generation, or maybe even 2, who knows, isn't available on like desktop at all. Would not surprise me. We'll see.
Cool. That's interesting. I don't suppose they've talked about publicly about when.
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. It'd be coming up if it'd be mentioned a lot more.
It's not a part of the recently announced stuff. Didn't they announce like the 11th gen for laptops or something recently?
I know Tiger Lake. Yeah, actually, we had a question about that from YouTube. Tiger Lake and the iGPU related to that.
I think that stuff is just laptops, and man, we don't do much with laptops. Not right now.
Yeah.
We've talked about maybe expanding our testing out into laptops at some point, but the hard part for us is, it really kind of comes down to funding, because like all the testing we do, we get basically paid via workstation sales, from, Puget Systems, as a whole. So like we kind of have to prioritize our own testing on things that will get us workstation sales, and laptops, we don't sell laptops. But we've been trying to talk and figure out ways that we could do that. I mean, it's tough because we basically have to find someone who's willing to pay us. And that's either like get Lenovo or Dell or HP to bring us on as a third party, like yeah, don't trust us because we're we're saying how good our products are. Trust these guys because they're an authority and they're not us. Like, because again, just like we were saying before, like don't trust Intel or Nvidia or those guys with their own benchmarks. Dell and HP have the same exact problem. And to some degree, so do we kind of. Every once in a while, we get someone who like, well, you're obviously just, you're cherry picking your results because you're Intel fanboys. It's like, oh,
Right.
okay. If you're going to believe that we're in cherry picking results when we have these giant charts, like
Yeah.
with all the source.
Heck,
yes, I made up all
run
of
the
these,
benchmark
like,
yourself.
Yeah, you can run the benchmarks yourself. Well, even then, they'll say that we like tweaked the benchmark to favor Intel or AMD. I know, it comes up all the time. It's especially funny because it's like, well, all our benchmark does is it opens Premiere, like loads a video and hits play and tells you like what the frames per second was. Like, we can't control how Premiere Pro works. Like if they favor Intel or AMD or whatever, like that's actually what people want to know. Like if Premiere Pro runs better on Intel, then like people are going to buy Intel for it because like who cares?
Yeah,
like,
get mad at Adobe, not us. Like we're just showing that the truth of things.
Now, okay, this is not true, but even if like Intel gave Adobe $5 billion to make AMD performance crap in Premiere Pro, like again, you as the end user, who cares? Like you can be upset at that, you can complain about that, but at the end of the day, yeah, you still need to get your work done. So you're going to get whatever works better for it, regardless of the ethics behind what happened to make it better on one over another. And again, that's totally not true right now because really AMD is actually probably ahead in most cases, or Intel and AMD are pretty much neck and neck. So you can go either way, but
yeah,
just need to put it that that's not actually true.
Man, that kind of stuff is always fun. Let's see here. Oh, we're being suggested to buy Clevo laptops and sell them as your own for a 30% markup. That's kind of how it was.
Yeah, we went through a bunch.
The laptop I'm using right now is an exact same model that Origin used to sell. I'm sure they've upgraded since because it's a 6700K, but exactly the same. It's just Origin paints them.
Yeah. Exactly most of the laptops you'll get out there from people like Origin or Main Gear. I don't even remember who sells laptops anymore. Most of them are either Clevo or Sager units, Sager, whatever it is. And those are super similar because I believe they were actually, it was one company at first and they were like brothers and then like they split up or something. And so then one either founded Sager or Clevo or something.
Industry secrets, by the way.
I don't think
now,
it's a secret.
I'm
not even 100% sure that's true.
Anybody could tell if you just go look, and they're exactly the same.
Yeah, but I noticed the first picture I saw are one of those two. There's a few people who do MSI, but that's harder because like MSI sells their own laptops. So but yeah, man, we sold. I forget which one it was. I think we bounced between the two somewhat. But the problem we ran into is that the bill of materials, like what's in the laptop, like randomly would change. So we would have like these laptops would be working great, and then suddenly, the trackpad is terrible. Oh, why? Well, they changed the trackpad for who knows why. And often like Clevo or Sager, like they would have no idea about it either because it's just the factory in China or Taiwan or whatever where they found these other parts that they could get for 50 cents cheaper, so they're going to use that. And so we had to deal with that constantly with trackpads, with the displays, with the cables that would go between the displays. Like it would change. So like, we couldn't repair a new laptop, even if we had like old units, because like this cable is different now. Great. Okay. So we were having to keep like dozens of units that we could then Frankenstein repairs. And it was terrible. So we dropped out of laptops just because like the experience was terrible for everyone. And it was a huge part of our business. Like John talks about this in some of the streams. It was something just like 40% of our business. And we dropped it because it was just terrible. It was so much of our support tickets, so much of our time. None of our, well, I wouldn't say none, but enough of our customers were unhappy with it that it just wasn't worth it. So we just dropped it. You can't do laptops from a company our size well. Like the only way you can do laptops well is to have someone basically on that factory line in China or whatever, and like watching to make sure they don't change stuff on you. Like that's the only way to do it. And like Dell can do that, HP can do that, No one else can do that. So
Yeah.
even those other guys, like maybe it's gotten better now, but anytime people ask about like laptops, I always just tell them to buy from the big guys. Like I've heard good things about like Razer, and Razer's like one of the few like more like high performance laptops that maybe I'd recommend. But other than that, like I only ever recommend HP to like family. I just tell them do HP. HP seems to be a pretty good balance for me in terms of like price and quality.
Their workstation style laptops are tip top. I had one. I bought it used, and then I never turned it off for like over 2 years. It was plugged into my television and on nonstop, and never had a problem with it. That was outstanding quality.
Yeah.
It was great.
I just wish a lot of laptops, I wish they would beef up the power socket. There are always these tiny little itty bitty plugs. And I hate them. That's one of the things that like I really liked about the old MacBooks was that like magnetic power thing.
Oh,
that thing was amazing. And like I know that's not possible anymore. Laptops are drawing too much power for that kind of a connector, but like that was awesome. Or at the very least, there's some laptops out there that are using USB-C for power. It's like, yes, every laptop just start using USB-C for power, please.
Yeah,
so much better.
That'd be great.
But I know because especially like the laptops I tend to buy for like family, like we're like home laptops, so they're not high end laptops. They're like $500-$600 laptops. So like, yeah, I get that they can't, but still, like, what's the price difference between those little barrel connectors and my USB-C port? It can't be that much.
Yeah. So, all right, we are a little over our hour. We'll take this one last question from the Great Daft Git on Twitch. He says, "What do you guys think of new Nvidia power connector?"
Oh, the 12-pin thing.
Mm-hmm.
Here, I'll switch over OBS because I had pulled up a couple of figuring we would talk about some of these. I pulled up some of the unboxing videos. I know anything in these videos we can talk about.
That's right.
Where's one of these ones? There we go. Yeah, this is from Bitwit, which, man, Bitwit, Kyle does a great job on so many things.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's this connector. So it's a 12-pin connector. I'm trying to find one where he actually has it. There we go. So yeah, it's gonna be a lot of adapters that people are gonna have to use. I think was it Seasonic? Some power supply manufacturers show that they will have cables that will go directly to the power supply. So it actually still splits it, but then it goes to 2 of the 8 pins on the power supply, so you don't have to use an adapter like this.
Nice. I have to say I was surprised at how small it is.
Yeah, it's definitely smaller. And
I really expected it to be like an 8-pin plus 4. I really did. And so to see tiny, what is it, 12 volts or something crazy like that? I can't remember.
It should be, well, since it's adapting from 2 8-pin, if I imagine it should be 6 12-volt pins and then 6 ground pins.
Okay.
I don't know which, but.
Yeah, I was surprised at how tiny it really is.
Yeah, because there's so much wasted space on a lot of connectors. But the weird thing with it is where it comes out to me more than anything.
That is very weird. I don't know why it's
top of the card. Well, and the reason
in the
for
middle,
that, you can kind of see it in here. Let me see if I can find it better. I'm just bumping around so much here. So the PCB actually only goes to like here, I believe, is what a lot of them were saying. I'm not sure if it's straight on or whatever, because this fan is blowing through the card, so there's no PCB over here. So you can't put like a connector on the end. Like the only way you could do that would be to like run a cable here, and that's just more points of failure and stuff.
Sure.
So they have to put it, in the middle of the card because that is the only place where there's actually a PCB.
Oh, okay. Because that's actually the end, or probably near the end of the PCB.
This is the end of the PCB. So the PCB only goes to here. So they have to put a connector there. But yeah, it's going to be so weird for like cabling. Like I wouldn't be surprised if there are some aftermarket cards where there's like a plastic piece, like a plastic shroud that clips on.
Like that elbow thing EVGA did.
Yeah, EVGA's elbow. Elbow power. Let's see if I can find it real quick. Yeah, this thing.
Yeah.
Whoa. This kind of a power connector. Now that
I could see
moves it, but I could see it just like a shroud that just has that. And knowing Asus and Gigabyte and EVGA and those guys will probably be LED or have like some readout for like a GPU temperature or something. But I imagine someone's gonna have to do something like that. Like even us, like our bracing and stuff might end up having some sort of like support. So like the cable comes out and then it gets like zip tied down, towards the end of the card or something, or like a pass through or something that just holds it against the card. Because like, yeah, it's just such a funky design. It's so weird having it in the middle like that. But
yeah, I get it's almost the necessity of it though.
Yeah, it is the necessity of it. But it's also just funky that like they're blowing through here, but there's not a PCB, so there must be like some heat pipes. Because I don't think there's been any teardowns.
Not that I'm
it's probably they're not allowed to. Like all these unboxing things the other day, like they're just unboxing, like it's only the outside of the card. So I bet there's like a no teardown rule. But there might be like some heat pipes or something, because they've got to be cooling something on the PCB. Like having fins that are cooling nothing doesn't make any sense. So we'll see. We're getting into speculation there, but
yeah.
But yeah, that power connector is going to be interesting for us to deal with. I'm not a fan of adapters, so I'm sure we're going to go straight to the power supply as much as possible, even if we have to pay for cables, because any adapter is just another point of failure. And these cards are going to pull a lot of watts, so less points of failure worth it.
All right, so cool. We'll wrap it up there. We'll say goodbye. Thank you, Matt, for joining us for another outstanding Labs Open Office Hour, and thank you as well, the audience, for joining us as for another fantastic Labs Open Office Hour. Thank you, and especially for all the questions. That is the whole point of all of this, is to kind of get you guys into the office and kind of and answer the questions that maybe aren't quite answered in the articles, or just a little more detail on things that we haven't already talked about. So really big thank you guys for everybody who asked questions and talked and engaged here. Is super great. Thank you very much.
I will put in real quick that the 3080's actual availability date is the 17th. That's next Thursday, which means we definitely, I don't know, I think you said it was dawn next week.
Correct.
But we'll actually be able to talk about stuff, because there'll actually be some like reviews out. It's hard to say whether we will or not. I mean, again, getting into like NDA stuff, but we'll see. Hopefully, I guess is what I'll say. Hopefully we'll have stuff, but if not, there'll be like, I'm sure Linus will have stuff, and Bitwit and all those other guys. So there'll be plenty of stuff. And some of those guys are starting to use our benchmarks even now too. So hopefully we'll have some of that to talk about.
So, all right. We do this every Wednesday and Friday, 1 p.m. Pacific time. Wednesdays are industry experts. We bring them in to talk about their workflow and that, get kind of a little better peek behind the curtain of what they do. And on Fridays, we bring in our own experts to talk about kind of the crossover of hardware and software. And sometimes we just complain about how silly marketing bar charts are. So tune in, mark your calendars every Wednesday and Friday, 1 p.m. Pacific time. Be there or we'll be sad. Okay? All right. We'll see you guys later.
Right,
bye.